Hello everybody. Today I want to talk about a truly challenging topic. The topic of death, of giving death. I've mentioned how our unconscious fear of dying, of receiving death, might be related to issues with sleep and also with orgasm. Today I want to talk about giving death. Something that's even further out of our conscious awareness. Something that most of us don't identify with as a process and as an action. And yet we all do it. And we all need to own it eventually, at least if we want to be truly healthy and whole. As long as I say no to something, as long as I exclude it from my conscious awareness, from my self-identification, I push it into my shadow. I project it onto the outside world. I only see it and judge it heavily in the other. But I don't see it in me. I don't own that part of myself. And so it's my shadow. And it's the shadow part that usually shows up as dis-ease, as symptoms, as unwanted habits, as accidents, as an opportunity to embrace and integrate this part, as a chance to say yes to everything that exists, to ultimately become one with everything, to transcend duality and become whole. That's the ultimate purpose of the soul. One year ago, we decided to give life to baby chicks. We incubated 12 eggs and 10 baby chicks got born. As it turned out, 8 of these 10 chicks were roosters. And if you've ever raised your own chickens, you know that this is a problem. You can only keep one rooster for a minimum of 5, 6 hens, ideally 10 to 15. Why? Because they're so active in their primal sexual reproductive energy that they constantly want to climb onto the hens, which for the hens is a stress factor. And so having 8 roosters for only 4 hens was an issue. And we only, of course, found that out as they grew up, because in the beginning you cannot know what gender they have. But when it became clear, it also became clear that eventually 5 to 6 of them would have to go. And where do they go? Well, theoretically, you could give them to other people. But everybody's in the same situation. Everybody wants hens for eggs. And usually everybody already has a rooster. So eventually the roosters go into the cooking pot. Whether it's your own or somebody else's. That's the way nature intends it. Hens for eggs and roosters for meat. So you already see how these two go hand in hand. And I do eat chicken, I do eat meat. And so I had the desire to go through the whole process, to raise my own chickens and to give death to my own chickens, to give them life and to give them death. And so I decided that that's what I was going to do. One of the roosters was taken by nature, by a predator. And we decided to keep 2, buy some extra hens. But then there were still 5 left. And so I had the opportunity to go through that process, which is very different in reality than in imagination. And I had to sit with all the different feelings and emotions and thoughts that came up throughout the whole process, starting from who is gonna be the one to go and who's gonna be the one to stay, who is allowed to stay, who is allowed to go. I'm gonna talk about that later more, how both can be a gift. And the first ones that I decided to give death to were the ones that were most alpha, the ones that were most aggressive to the hens and to me. So I could really observe how they were triggering me, both in my own boundaries by attacking me, trying to test who's the boss, and also by being the ones most aggressive towards the hens, running after them, climbing onto them, which really was painful to observe because it looked a lot like rape. And often I observed feeling completely powerless and feeling like a bad mother who doesn't protect her daughters, because the hens really don't enjoy the process, especially if it's massive. They might lose feathers, they might stop eating, they might hide, they might not want to go out. And all of that happened to 2 of the preferred victims. And so at one point I just knew I had to end their lives also for the sake of the life of the hens. And I wished I could say that it all went smoothly and I did it perfectly and the roosters didn't suffer, because that's the idea we have, right? That industrial killing is torture and suffering, and small scale is somehow more peaceful, less stressful. And that might be the case, and it might not be the case, because everything in life, we have to learn it. We have to learn by doing. We have to gain experience. And of course we can learn from the experience of others as well. And I've watched videos and I had people explain to me how to do it. I've even watched people do it. And then still it's a different story when you do it yourself. And so no, my roosters probably suffered a bit. The process lasted longer than I would have wanted it to last. And I had to sit with that too, with that feeling of guilt. And of course, I got better throughout the process, as I was doing it 5 times. But still, the second group of roosters that had to go were the least alpha ones. The ones that actually, until the very end, I thought were hens, because they never sang, they never climbed onto a hen. Only when they started to, eventually, I actually realized that these were roosters too. And I decided that they too had to go because they were not assertive enough. And not protective enough. And that was much more difficult than the first group because the first group of roosters, the really alpha aggressive ones, attacking ones, I didn't like them that much. And that was easier. But actually, I also didn't want to kill them from that place of anger, of powerlessness. Even though I could observe that desire. And I would argue that we all have experienced that desire. When someone triggers us, when someone steps over our boundaries, attacks us, it's almost natural to feel like defending ourselves, like hitting back, like killing them. It's a power game eventually. I am stronger than you. You're attacking me, I'm gonna kill you. And I could observe that in me, and I definitely did not want to act from that place. So I waited until I could do it from another place. But it was definitely present. And in the second group, that was not the case. I really liked these roosters. They were so nice and beautiful. So it took me a bit longer to really be able to give them death too. And this whole wording of giving death is a conscious choice. Why? Because I want to point out how giving life and giving death are just two perspectives of the same process. But usually one of them we judge as good, as nice, as welcome, as desirable, and the other one we judge as bad, as not desirable, as something that is painful and a punishment and that should be avoided, ideally, and not exist. But who are we to know whether giving and as such receiving life is always a gift, and whether giving and as such receiving death is always a punishment? I would say that sometimes receiving death can be a gift of love. And sometimes receiving life might be a challenge. Ultimately, whatever happens is the soul's deepest desire to experience something that will allow it to grow, to evolve. And we are just the vessel, the tool, the instrument of this life energy that wants to change dimensions, that wants to come into this world or leave this world. So ultimately, we are not responsible, even though we have the responsibility to be as conscious as possible and to create the ideal circumstances for things then to unfold as they may. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't care, that we could just create suffering, and it doesn't matter. No. But if we do our best, and then things still go wrong, maybe it's not wrong after all. Of course, the animal, if now we talk about an animal, usually doesn't seem to want to go. And it seems like we're forcing it into something that it doesn't want to experience. But the same is true for many babies that don't seem to want to come into this world. And then we help them or force them. And one is good and one is bad. And I would just say again, whatever happens is the ultimate wish of their soul. And they need this experience, the particular experience. Birth is not always smooth. It's often a trauma. There's often pain and suffering involved. And it might even be necessary for this particular soul. So how come that we create the expectation that death should be smooth and free of pain and suffering? It's great if it happens. It's great if there's a natural, smooth birth. And yes, our choices contribute and play a big role in the probability of this to occur. But eventually it's out of our hands, and the same is true for death. Nature is so cruel if you observe it, but it doesn't conceptualize cruelty. It doesn't make it a bad thing. And again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't care. Of course, it's good if we can reduce suffering. Or not, who knows? The more I study astrology, actually, the more I come to question this whole idea that we should try to reduce suffering at all costs, that we should try to take suffering away from people, that we should somehow save them from their own destiny. That's a violation too. Everybody has the right to make themselves miserable, to suffer, and they need that somehow, even though it doesn't seem to make sense. We all give life and we all give death. And I'm not just talking about killing a mosquito or a carrot or a plant when you eat it. We are all responsible for taking the lives of animals and people, even though it's often indirect processes, and we actually also choose to not see them. But what we do not see, we do not own, as I say. And then we do not do it consciously. And it's important to make these processes conscious, because it's a responsibility and a power. They always go hand in hand. Life could not exist without death. Nature constantly needs to renew itself. If all we ever did was give life, give more life, and give more life, this would lead to a state of oversaturation. We need destruction, we need decay to make place and space for the new. If we want to be able to create, to give life consciously, we also need to be able to give death consciously. And the easier it is for us to move through these natural cycles of birth and death and rebirth, the smoother we will also be able to move through our own cycles of waking and sleeping, of menstruation and ovulation, of creation, fertility. Say yes to everything that exists in this world and in you. Thank you.